Hi there, Sugar Plums. Thank you so much for joining me for this video, which is a continuation of some of what I talked about in my previous video on the channel, all about anti-racist work, white privilege, that kind of thing. I'm going to be delving even deeper into these topics, talking about some things that I've observed within myself while I've been doing my anti-racist work, within the spiritual community while the anti-racist work has been going on or not going on, as the case may be. If you watch my last video on the channel, you will already know that I have made some commitments to doing anti-racist work, and one of those commitments definitely centres on using my platform to highlight the importance of doing anti-racist work and addressing the collective shadow of racism in society. And I guess you could consider this video to be somewhat of a haphazard, ramshackle contribution to that commitment. So there are going to be more helpful and, let's say, informative and more targeted videos coming in the future. But for now, this is me just kind of ambling through certain things. I'm definitely going to be doing a bit of venting. I'm definitely also going to be doing a bit of calling myself out. I would be very interested to see what the comments are underneath this particular video. And as with the last one, I'm going to have this comment section on approval only for obvious reasons. There are definitely going to be a higher number than usual of trolls and people just coming in to upset the energy and write things that are completely unproductive, totally bigoted. And I'm really glad that I had my last comment section on approval only, because even though there was only a small handful of bullshit comments that I had to deal with, fortunately, there definitely were bullshit comments that I'm glad never actually ended up underneath my video, because I had the opportunity to do the comments via approval only. So that will be happening here as well. So if you leave comments while you're watching my video or just afterwards and you don't see them come up, please don't worry, I have received them. They've just gone into my approval only file and they will not be approved until I actually see that they are fit for purpose. So they don't contain racism, they don't contain bigotry. I think it's really important to keep the comments section as a safe and productive space. I don't mind critique, I don't mind feedback that doesn't align with my beliefs, but I definitely draw the line at racism, and I also draw the line at things that are just not relevant. I definitely did not allow certain comments to come through under my last video if they were not relevant enough to the topic at hand. I want to keep things on task. And some people just wandered into really strange territory that I just didn't think was relevant or suitable. It's not about that. It's about this. It's about anti-racism. It's about the shadow of racism, the collective shadow of racism, and it's about doing personal work and taking personal responsibility. So any comments that aren't strictly about that will also not be approved, because I don't want the comment section to be awash with things that are just pulling us away from the point. I warned you that this video was going to be a mishmash of quite a few different things. I'm going to go down a few different wormholes, and I would really appreciate it if you stayed with me. So first of all, one thing that I want to really strongly recommend that you do if you're watching this because you know that you want to do your anti-racist work as part of your spiritual practice, you want to do your anti-racist work as part of your commitment to your own personal development, is to start making your own list of resources, different documentaries that you watch that you felt really educated you and helped you, different organizations that you can donate to, different Black voices that you want to uplift in various different communities. I think it's really important that we all begin to compile our own lists of the things that we can refer to time and time again to sort of reforge our commitment to doing anti-racist work. The reason I say this is because I do see a lot of people requesting lists of places that they can donate, things that they can watch, materials that they can read, that kind of thing, resources. And although there's nothing wrong with requesting those things, I do just see a lot of requests for lists and a lot of people just sort of wanting to be directed to exactly where they should go and exactly what they should watch and exactly what they ought to be doing. And I do hope that those people are collating those resources together into their own list of things that they then can refer back to, because it does take a lot of work to put these kinds of lists together, and it does require a lot from somebody to actually collate all of this information together for you. Now, there are so many amazing lists that have been made of various different resources, various different sort of news articles, various different initiatives you can donate to, lots of different information that's been put together for people. And I have gone ahead and made my own little collection of things that might be useful for you. So I'm going to leave it below in either a Google Doc Doc, or I'm gonna link it in the comments and in the community page. I'm not sure how I'm gonna do it yet. I might put it in a Google Doc and then give you guys a public link for the Google Doc or something. But bear in mind that, first of all, my list is not an exhaustive list. There are lots of lists out there of different places to donate, different things that you can watch, different reading materials you can get your hands on, different things you can do, ways that you can contribute financially without actually spending any money if you don't have a lot of pennies right now. There's so much information. There's such a wealth of information. I would definitely recommend that you are keeping a list of the things that you have found most helpful, or a list of the organisations that are closest to your heart, that you have donated to and that you want to continue to donate to. You know, make sure that you are creating your own list that you refer back to. In the list that I have provided, I have made an effort to include organisations that I haven't seen quite so widely publicised elsewhere. And I've also made a list of some documentaries that I have found really useful that might be things that you want to look into watching, as well as repeating for you guys the reading list that I shared in my previous video. In my previous video, there were a few things that I left off of the reading list. First of all, because unfortunately I ran out of room in the description area anyway, but also because I have certain books that I have at home that were on my reading list for 2020, but I'm actually not at home right now. I'm still in Amsterdam at the present moment. So I completely forgot that I actually made a commitment in 2019 to make sure that in 2020 I read about the history of immigration to the UK and information about how specifically Afro-Caribbean immigrants in particular have been treated in the UK and what their experience has been like and stuff. So I also do want to add those things to the reading list. So in the Google Doc, I will make sure that those things are added to the reading list as well. I am going to be focusing mainly on organisations, initiatives and reading which focuses on the Black American experience and the UK Black experience. Obviously, I'm aware that not everybody who watches me is from America or from the UK, but I think that when you're making a list, it's really important that you try and narrow down its focus, otherwise you're going to be there forever. But I would always recommend that if you feel like you need to do reading about what's going on in terms of racism in your country, and you feel like you need to get specific about your location, do that. No one and nothing is stopping you from doing that. We can all do our own research to find the resources that will really cater for us in terms of where we are, what we can do, how we can be of service the most in our particular life and in our particular area. I think it's really valuable to understand and appreciate what's going on globally, but if you feel like there are a lack of resources circulating online that help you to understand how you can be involved in your own country, go and find those resources. Do not lament the fact that there is not a list of those resources. Make the list yourself and share it on to others in your country who are interested in doing the anti-racist work too. If you follow me on my other social media platforms, Twitter, Facebook and Instagram, you will find some recommendations for different things that you can watch, different channels that you can get into and subscribe to. I am specifically making an effort to highlight the voices of Black women, and this is part of the initiative to amplify melanated voices, which I think is a really amazing hashtag. So on Instagram, I am doing some posts at the moment that collect together 9 different creators that I follow that I think are really awesome, whose work I think is important or entertaining or challenging or informative. So definitely go over onto Instagram if you are on Instagram and check out the list that I've been putting out. There are going to be a few more lists to come. On Facebook, I have been sharing some really awesome videos of various different Black creators that are talking about their experiences, talking about what they feel needs to change, just really offering their opinions from these incredibly empowered and heartfelt places. So definitely, if you're not following my Facebook page or you're not getting notifications for my Facebook page and you want to see what I'm recommending over there in terms of material that you can watch, please do so. On Twitter, there's a lot of retweeting going on for me. I'm not as active on Twitter. I do prefer Facebook and Instagram. They are sort of my preferred platforms, but I am going to be making an effort, as well as doing a lot of retweeting of Black voices and really sort of just amplifying Black opinion pieces and really important things that Black creators on Twitter are saying. I'm going to make an effort to collect together my favorite Twitter accounts that I follow. Again, this will be my attempt at amplifying melanated voices. So if you like to be on Twitter, Twitter and you would like to hear more from Black creators on Twitter, then I will be providing that there. I will also be making a treasure hunt episode that features only Black creators on YouTube, so please look out for that, because since I've been doing my collections of Black creators on Instagram, I've had quite a few DMs from people asking me to please do the same on YouTube, so I will definitely go ahead and do the same on YouTube at some point in the not too distant future. I really love the focus on amplifying melanated voices in various different communities, whatever communities you're part of, whatever communities your business happens to be in. I think that goes beyond this protest movement, which is of course really important, and I don't want to underestimate the importance of what's going on now with the protests and that message. But I think just in general that white people could stand to vastly diversify the creators that they are taking inspiration from or listening to. And I think that amplifying melanated voices is something that we just need to be more conscious of in general and focus on more in general. I'm just really happy to see so many white people in the spiritual community, the card-slinging community, the wellness community, and beyond, in all different kinds of communities and industries, asking themselves, how white is my list of people that I follow? You know, how much do I remain in the white space and only listen to white voices and only take advantage of white expertise or only pay white people for products and services? I think that's a really important and valuable question for people to ask themselves. And I think that if we have a platform and we have the opportunity to really pay homage and give recognition to the non-white creators that have deeply inspired us, then now would be an incredible time to do so. But I also think it just reminds us to continue to do so and to make that into something that is normal. So the next thing that I would like to address in this video is something that a couple of people mentioned in the comments underneath my previous video. And it's about the interchangeable way that I've been using the terms Black and POC. I feel like I've been lovingly called in on this, basically by people who are trying to explain that it's not helpful to use the terms POC and Black interchangeably, and that when I'm talking about things that affect Black communities, or when I'm talking about police brutality committed against Black people, I really do need to stick to using Black and not, you know, sort of confuse things by saying non-white or POC, which are also terms that I use. So first of all, I want to say that from now on, when I'm talking about things that specifically affect the Black community, I'm going to say Black, and I'm not going to mix it up with POC or non-white. The other thing that I want to say, and I completely get why that is important, I do understand that, but the other thing that I want to say is that the reason that I think I became confused and like befuddled and maybe a little bit unsure of what I was doing and started using terms interchangeably is because even though I am a huge supporter of Black Lives Matter, and I always have been a supporter of Black Lives Matter since its inception, and even though what prompted me to make my last video was certainly something that is connected in no uncertain terms to the oppression of Black Americans and brutality against Black Americans, I'm also very aware that I'm talking to an international audience, and I want to talk about the work of anti-racism in broader terms as well. So although I know that I've got some work to do when it comes to ensuring that I stick to using the term Black when I'm talking about Black people, their struggles, their experiences, there are still going to be times where it is more appropriate for me to use the term non-white or the term POC, because I'm talking about racism in broader terms. I think a lot of the anti-racist resources that I'm going to be putting out on my channel are going to speak to people who have seen evidence of racism in their communities, which is leveled towards other non-white groups. So I'm talking about, you know, oppression that's leveled towards Asian people, or oppression that's leveled towards Indigenous people in different countries, etc. So and even in my own country, there's certainly issues with police brutality against Black people for sure, and there has been for decades. And for anybody who doesn't believe me and thinks I'm talking shit, please check my list that I mentioned earlier. I'm going to be leaving a very important Twitter thread in there. Please get yourselves educated. There is definitely an issue, and a long-standing issue, with police brutality against Black people in the UK. So please do not kid yourselves that we are just over here eating popcorn, watching the sort of sideshow that's going on in America and saying, oh, what a shame, I'm so glad it's not like that here. It is like that in the UK, so please, you know, don't be too quick to feel that we are absolved of our own responsibility to address police brutality and racially motivated police brutality, I should say. Going back to my point though, what I was going to say was that the UK is also dealing with a massive rise in Islamophobic crime. Certainly there's also, a rise in anti-Semitic crime. There's certainly across the board just been a lot of neo-fascist activity occurring. So I do want to make sure that I address the work of anti-racism in broader terms, but I still want to clarify 100% that I get that it's not helpful to use these terms non-white, POC and black interchangeably, and I will try to avoid doing that in the future. I think there's definitely going to be some instances where things are a bit sticky or a bit sort of muddled. It depends what point I'm trying to make and how cognizant I can be of making that point well, but I hear you. I hear that criticism. I take that critique on board completely. I would like to talk a little bit now about my own white fragility and how I've been experiencing it. I talked about white fragility in my last video, and if you did not watch my last video and you're wondering what white fragility is exactly, please refer to the list that I'm going to be offering of resources and things to watch and stuff like that, because I'm going to leave there a video by Robin DiAngelo explaining really quite well what white fragility is and what it's all about. For now though, I will just say that white fragility is a rather fitting description of a bunch of behaviours that white people tend to exhibit when we are feeling uncomfortable about dialogues around race and racial injustice and oppression of non-white groups. And it really sort of defines how we react when we are feeling defensive, or when we are feeling attacked, when we are feeling guilty, when we are feeling as though we are being told we have to be responsible or feel responsible for things that we don't feel responsible for. Instead of hearing and instead of listening and really appreciating a perspective that comes from a lived experience that is not our own, we may have a tendency to shut down, be angry, or try and tone police the conversation, essentially. And I want to talk about how my white fragility has been coming up personally, because I don't want this video to just be about like what other people can do or what I'm seeing that is annoying me. I'm definitely going to come on to what I'm seeing that's annoying me. Believe me, trust me, that is coming. But first of all, I would like to talk a bit about things that I'm witnessing in myself that maybe other people who are doing their anti-racist shadow work can relate to, and it might be helpful to hear me speak on it and actually sort of identify it in yourself and be like, oh, okay, there's some common ground there. Whew, okay, I'm gonna get really real about my own white fragility and how I'm seeing it come up. Okay. First thing, I notice my white fragility coming up when I am doing my listening work, which I think is a really important part of my personal anti-racist work, is just basically listening to Black people's lived experiences, listening to Black people talk about what they have been through that I will never have to go through, listening to Black people discuss things that they only experience because of race that obviously, I'll never have to experience because of race. So as I'm doing my listening work, I do notice my white fragility kind of like bubbling up a little bit whenever I come across a sort of generalized statement about white people and what they do or what they don't do, and I feel very strongly that it doesn't include me. And I think this is very, very common, right? So just for instance, if I come across a tweet or I come across a statement in a video from a Black person talking honestly about their lived experiences or their feelings about this very pertinent moment in our global history, when they say something like, I see a lot of white people doing performative activism, my white fragility comes up then, because I feel like I need that person to know that my activism is not performative and that I do not intend it that way, and I don't want it to come across that way. My white fragility bubbles up when I'm doing my listening work and I hear a Black person say that, a lot of white people are just jumping on this right now because it's a trend, and they never have previously done any anti-racist work and probably will not do after the trend, dies off and the momentum is not there anymore and the news cycle goes on to other things. And sometimes instead of listening to that and thinking, yeah, that is a concern, that is something to be worried about, that is something to address, not only within myself, but within the white communities in which I interact and in which I engage, my white fragility comes in and I think, well, I'm not like that. I cared about it before. I was doing my reading before. I was paying attention before. And that is white fragility. That's that feeling of like, I need to, you know, have everybody understand that I'm not part of the problem. I'm a different kind of white person and I'm not part of the problem. And so it's ego, right? But white fragility is very connected to ego in the white psyche. So I've noticed that it bubbles up then, and instead of focusing on the message, listening to the message, which is really important and true, it is true that there's going to be a lot of voices that are going to drop off after the momentum has died down and after the news cycle has moved on. There are going to be a lot of people who are willing to be allies now, who are not going to be so interested in being allies when something else is top of their list. And that is true. So instead of listening to that and thinking, okay, how can I make sure that I do not become part of that issue? And how can I make sure I engage my white audience to make sure that we all together are aware that that could be an issue? Instead, my white fragility jumps in and I'm like, I'm not one of them. That's not me. I, right? And I start centering. And so I have noticed that in myself, and I find that so interesting about doing this kind of shadow work in particular. And I'm not super harsh with myself about it. I think it's very important whenever you acknowledge anything coming through that is shadowy, whether it's connected to the personal, whether it's connected to the collective and the social and the broader thing. I think it's important to gently call yourself in and just be like, there we go. Okay, that's white fragility. That feeling of wanting to comment and be like, I don't do that, or I've always thought this, or whatever. Of course I never do, because I check myself before I wreck myself. But I do think that's really interesting, that is an area where white fragility comes up for me, where I stop focusing on the message for a second if I feel as though white people as a collective are being talked about in a way that doesn't include me. And I feel very keen to prove that, like, oh no, that doesn't include me. I'm not that type of white person. I'm not going to forget about this. I'm going to keep doing my work, or I've already been doing my work and I've been to anti-racist protests or whatever. That is centering me. That is actually taking my attention away from the Black person going through the emotional labor of giving me their story. And instead, I'm centering me, and I'm wanting to explain myself, or I'm wanting to identify myself as one of the good ones, right? And so that's something that I have noticed about my white fragility, that I have acknowledged and that I continue to sort of work with as I do my listening work. And I would love to hear in the comments from anybody who does feel similarly and has noticed that similar things have been coming up for them. For a long time now, whenever I have been doing reading or doing sort of watching or listening around how white people can do anti-racist work and how they can be allies, etc., I've heard it said a lot of times that if you hear a statement about white people as a collective and you note that the statement does not include you, it is not indicative of your behaviour, then don't worry about it, because it's not indicative of you, okay? Don't take it to a place where you're totally missing the message, you're not listening anymore, and you're taking it to a place of wanting to prove yourself, or wanting to center yourself, or wanting to start talking over that Black person who's sharing their experience in order to make sure that your narrative is acknowledged. Because that is definitely white privilege, and it's definitely white fragility, and it's just holding up the process for yourself and for them. It's holding up the process of them getting their message out. It's making them feel demeaned and not listened to, and that, you know, then it's just another fucking day for them of normality, of white people talking over and interrupting. And for me, it's not helping me do my anti-racist work if I'm suddenly coming off track and being like, no, but wait a minute, that doesn't describe me. That thing you just said about white people doesn't exactly describe me and what I'm doing, and I'm a white person. And it becomes I, me. So I've really been encouraging myself to witness that and recognize that and kind of own that when it comes up. There is a lot of talk at the moment about the importance of making sure that if you are a white person and you're doing your anti-racist work, that you are not looking for cookies, right? That you're not looking for validation from Black people right now. You are doing the work because it is the right thing to do, because it is in your heart to do it, because it is on your spirit to do it, and you're not looking for validation. And I think that is so important. I think my issue is that I don't think I'm looking for cookies, but I worry that people will think that I am. And that is definitely an aspect of white fragility. I think it's really interesting that as I'm using my social media platforms at the moment to put Black voices more to the front and to elevate Black creators, I'm worried that other people are going to think that I'm just looking for cookies, or indeed that those creators themselves are going to feel obligated to give me a cookie, meaning like give me some praise or give me some acknowledgement or make me feel like I'm a better class of white person because I did that. And I do worry about that. And it's interesting because it's just like the classic sort of neuroses that you get stuck in, where instead of focusing on the important work, which is to amplify Black voices and, you know, move people to the front of the conversation that should be there, instead you're worrying about like, well, how will I be perceived, and will they think that I'm just trying to do it to get validation from them, or you know, should I heart react people that have said that I'm great for sharing something, because what if they think that I think that I'm great for doing it? And it's just like tying myself up in my head in narratives that center me and how I'll be perceived, and how, you know, how there might be fallout for me, or how I don't want Black creators to think that they owe me anything for anything that I'm doing. So it's just interesting. It becomes about centering. And what I've realized about white fragility in my shadow work around this is that it's just a lot about centering. It's just a lot of me, I. How will I be perceived? How are people misunderstanding me? How can I make sure everybody knows exactly what my agenda is and exactly who I am and exactly what I've been through or exactly what I'm doing? And it's just really refreshing for myself to do the work, the shadow work around that, that shows me that like, okay, that's white fragility. That's coming from a place of white fragility. Calm down. It's not about you. It's actually about you utilizing your platform, or you interacting with this person who holds this view that you can kind of help them to see differently, or it's about you sort of making space for other people to speak. It's not about you and your story. Don't worry. It's okay if it's not about you and your story. You know, not everything has to be. So that's been something that I have acknowledged, is that I worry about how I'll be perceived, and I don't want people to think I'm looking for cookies, if you will. And I completely agree that white people doing anti-racist work in the world should not be looking for validation. Their work should absolutely not be conditional upon validation from the group that they are advocating for. You should just do the work anyway. Even if it is forever a thankless task. It should just be done because you know it's the right thing. It shouldn't be done because you feel like there's going to be some praise for you at the end of it and you're going to feel like a better person at the end of it. That just feeds into that white savior complex. So that's an interesting part of white fragility that I've noted, is that I worry that people will perceive me as seeking cookies, like trying to get cookies. And then I worry about like, well, you know, I want people to know that I'm not doing that. I'm genuinely doing this from this genuine place. And it's like, you know what, just do it. And if some people do hold some suspicion around why you're doing it, then keep doing it and keep doing it and keep doing it until they can trust and believe that you are doing it from an authentic place. So that's a lot of what it's about. It's about recognizing that, okay, maybe some people might regard activism from white people with a certain degree of suspicion, or the jury might be out on whether or not they feel that your activism is performative or not performative. But the point is just to keep going with your activism regardless, and keep going with being vocal regardless, because it's the right thing, not because you are ultimately looking from something from the marginalized group that you're advocating for. One thing I think about white fragility is that it definitely is linked to the instinct that white people have to center themselves, because white supremacy creates an environment throughout society where it's normal and it's okay for us to center ourselves, you know? And I do think that that's something that we need to look out for as white people doing anti-racist work, because I have noted that a lot of people do want to talk about their own story in relation to the work that they're doing. And I do think that that centering of our stories and our narratives and our experiences as white people does come up in anti-racist work, and we could afford to look more closely at when it does come up. And I will definitely include myself in this as well and look closely at when it comes up for me. So one thing that's interesting is that I've noticed a lot of people wanting to center their comments and their interactions online around their own story and their own limitations. For instance, if somebody can't go out to protest because they have certain issues going on with their physical health or with other situations, they will write a long list of the reasons why they can't go out to protest in the street. And I think to myself, yeah, but none of that is necessary. Like, nobody's saying everybody has to go and protest in the street. If you can't go out and protest in the street because you are, you have certain physical limitations maybe that would prevent you from doing that, or whatever the case may be, wouldn't it be better to use the energy that you've just spent in writing out all of the reasons why you can't go out to protest in the street, and instead sign some petitions, share some stuff on social media, do some reading around anti-racism and white supremacy? Think about how that energy is being used. Instead of using that energy to further your own work as a white person that wants to be anti-racist consciously, you have instead asked a black person in the midst of this situation to stop what they're doing and read something about you and your life and your problems and why you can't do what you feel that you're being asked to do. And I think that's part of white fragility as well, is it's very much about like wanting to put the lens onto ourselves and the attention onto ourselves by talking about what is difficult for us and why. One thing that I think it would be very good for white people, myself included, to do if they really want to do this anti-racist shadow work is to realise that everybody's skill set is different, everybody's limitations are different, everybody's strengths are different, and everybody's going to be approaching this in a different way. As long as they are approaching it, that's the important thing. I think that will then give us the freedom to recognise that instead of feeling that we have to justify why we can't do this particular thing, but we will do this particular thing, or why life is hard for us in this particular way, and so we can't do this. Instead, we can use that same space and energy and focus that we've just put into writing this long post about, like, well, I can't really stand up to my dad on this because he's violent and racist, so that has implications for me. Okay, fair enough, that has implications for you. But really, when you're doing your anti-racist work, it's about recognizing, oh, I'm putting energy into writing down my narrative and my experiences. Where could I better spend that energy? Instead of justifying why I won't have a conversation with a specific family member, or I can't go out to protest, or whatever the case might be, where can I do my anti-racist work? Where can I better spend this energy to do anti-racist work, rather than asking a black person to read about me and my life and my constraints and my frustrations? And that's definitely been something that's really been sort of brought to my attention through this process of getting really clear about the fact that I do want this to be a part of my shadow work in an ongoing way. Any time that you are replying to somebody who's talking about their experiences of racism, and you are replying from the perspective of your story, your experiences, how you are positioned to be able to speak on something, or how you can relate to it because as a white person it's not the same, but you've been through something that's kind of similar because ... That's where you're edging into, I think, white fragility, because you're taking attention and focus away from the injustice that we're supposed to be talking about, and you are instead kind of bringing everything back to a centering on whiteness. So I would urge you to see yourself in the throes of doing that and recognize it. And that's been something about my anti-racism shadow work that's been interesting, is like, how keen am I to explain to somebody that my personal narrative prevents me from doing this, or it means that I can only do something this way or that way? It's like, don't take time and energy away from somebody within that marginalized or oppressed group by asking them to focus on you as a white person. That is white fragility, and that is white privilege. If you're listening to me talking right now and you're thinking, oh my God, I totally did that the other day. I started talking about how I was bullied at school and how I can kind of understand about racist bullying because I was bullied for being a weirdo and a goth or whatever. Don't beat yourself up, but just don't ever do that again. It's all about learning. You live, you learn, as Alanis Morissette once put it. Another way that my white fragility comes up is in feeling tired of the conversation about racism, feeling fatigued when I am sort of processing the news about things that have been happening, evidence that's been collected together that shows police brutality against protesters, stories that are coming up and resurfacing after sometimes decades in the UK and in other places, that really highlight the injustices that have been going on for ages when it comes to black people and their interactions with the police. Feeling that sense of like, oh my God, this is so much, this is so overwhelming, this is so much to take on, I'm so angry, I'm so upset, I want to run away and hide in a corner. And it's really, again, about me being gentle but firm with myself. and saying to myself, it's funny, isn't it, how tiring it gets and how quickly it gets tiring. If you are fed up of focusing on it as an outsider, imagine what it must be like to be forced to focus on it, because at any moment it might actually directly affect you. So, you know, that's white fragility too, is just kind of feeling like, oh, this is really, you know, it's making me weary. It's making me tired. It's so much. It's so much. Whenever I start to think like, God, this is such a lot. This is overwhelming. I take a little break and I take a deep breath and I come back to my center and I come back to my words of power and I come back to my core. And I just think to myself, darling, the layers of this and the levels of this that you will never have to directly experience. Just think about that. Just be very wary of that. Just be very conscious of that. And keep going. Keep doing the work. Keep listening. Keep thinking about how you are going to instigate change personally. You personally. What is your responsibility in this? I have definitely also felt white fragility when it comes to calling people out, when it comes to having conversations with white people who did not get the memo. And this is something that is happening more in my more private life, my personal life. I don't want you guys to think I hang out with neo-Nazis or anything, because I totally don't. But not everybody that I know in the whole sphere of everybody that I am connected to is on the same page with this. You know, there are some things there are some sentiments being shared that are definitely politicized in a way that is intended to discredit the protests and discredit the message. And my white fragility comes along when I feel like I'm too tired to engage with a white person who is sharing something that is problematic. I'm too tired to explain to this white person why it's not okay for them to share this thing that is actually trying to discredit an entire movement which is absolutely valid, which highlights decades and decades and decades of oppression and violence. Again, you know, it's white fragility, and I lock into that. I recognize that. I'm trying to see it wherever I can, and I'm trying to challenge myself to not just slink away because I can. And I'm going to repeat that for myself and for you. I'm challenging myself to not just slink away because I can. Because I can, you know, because it's not my lived reality, and I can move on to other things. But my challenge is not to do that. My challenge to me is not to do that. My loyalty to me and to who I think I am as a human being is not to do that. Another thing that I have been coming across, and I've been seeing people saying, is that they would like to speak up, but they feel like nothing is ever good enough, nothing is ever right. Whatever they're going to say, they're going to get their head bitten off by black people who are saying that they're doing it wrong, they're saying it wrong. And to that, I would say that is absolutely white fragility in action. This feeling that if you are not immediately going to receive praise and cookies first time around for doing something perfectly right out of the gate, then you don't want to do it at all, because it would hurt your pride to be corrected or to be guided or to be urged to follow a more appropriate route. You know, and really the first step in doing anti-racism shadow work is to recognize that you are fearful of taking action that you know is the right action to take, but that you may do it in a way that needs to be polished, needs to be corrected, needs to be guided, and that is okay. That's okay. It's okay to take instruction. It's okay to recognize that you need to correct yourself and you need to correct your path. We really do need to train the ego to sit on the naughty chair and to recognize that it's okay to understand that there are things that we didn't understand until we understood them, and we will correct our course accordingly. And it kind of goes back to what I was saying earlier as well about wanting cookies, wanting validation. It's really important that we know going into this that we're not doing whatever it is we're doing in anti-racism work to receive validation, to receive cookies. So if you feel like, well, you know, I would do this work, but I'm probably not going to get a cookie for it. I'm probably going to, you know, be corrected or be told that I need to change my wording or, you know, whatever, I need to do better next time, so I'm not going to do it. Then I think you might need to shadow work the fact that the importance of anti-racism hasn't yet gone from your head to your heart, okay? Because it's not about receiving accolades for just doing the right thing. It's really about doing the right thing anyway, regardless. And it's not about holding your breath and waiting for a black person to come along and say, you're an ally, awesome work, amazing, thanks so much, couldn't have done it without you. If that is what is required in order for you to do your anti-racism work, then your anti-racism work is conditional upon being approved of, upon receiving validation, and upon being centered. And that is just something that needs to be shadow worked. So if I'm talking right now and you're hearing me and you're thinking, I am actually withholding my anti-racism actions because I want to know that I'm going to get something for that investment. I want to know that it's going to be received in the very correct way that I insist that it be received as a white person, then own that, shadow work that. Only good things can come from you recognizing that that is a problem for you and that is a way of thinking that you are holding on to. I'm going to talk now about some of the things I've seen happening in the spiritual community, the wellness community, etc. The circles I run in and mingle in, right? I'm going to talk about some of the things I'm seeing that have frustrated me. I'm going to be honest, I very, very rarely take anything on my channel into rant territory, but this part of the video might get a little bit ranty. In fact, I don't know why I'm saying it might, because it definitely will. There's going to be some rantiness ahead, okay? First of all, let me come right out of the gate and say straight away that I am very impressed with how many people I've seen really putting their stance forward on this and really acknowledging that there's work to be done and really being bold and amplifying melanated voices, showing support for Black Lives Matter, people with businesses, people with groups, people running communities in the card-slinging world, in the witchy world or the wellness world. I'm seeing a lot of very bold stances being put forth. And I suppose I have kind of like a bird's eye view of everything because I do follow a lot of people on a lot of different platforms and I've been doing this work for a while, so I do have quite a broad spectrum of different accounts to look at and different people that I follow. And I suppose you could say therefore that I have a positive spin on things because of the amount of people that I've just seen coming out and very, very fervently saying Black Lives Matter, witches against white supremacy, you know, and these are the commitments that I'm making. I'm seeing that a lot and it's amazing to see. I'm loving it. And that's something that's been positive. So I want to say that first of all. But I have definitely seen some things that have frustrated me, that have confused me, that have disappointed me. And I want to talk about those things as well. I definitely had that intention for this video too, that I wanted to go into just getting some things off of my fucking chest, okay, as well. So I am going to endeavour to do that right now. There seems to be this place where white people do a lot of really good work and really good activism and really important work for social change and progression and justice. And the place is this mysterious place. I've never been there myself. I couldn't drop a pin for you to get there. I don't know where it is on Google Maps, but I'm being reliably informed over and over again that it's a place called Behind the Scenes. Behind the Scenes is where people are doing their anti-racist work. It's behind the scenes, guys. And that's what I keep being informed over and over again. So you'll see people that will say, well, I'm being attacked for not coming out in support of Black Lives Matter. I'm being attacked for not at least posting places that you can donate or posting any sentiments regarding the situation or the movement at all. But it's not fair that I'm being criticised. It's not fair that I'm being questioned because people don't know what I do behind the scenes. People don't know how active I am behind the scenes. People have got no right to judge me for what I do on social media as a public figure, as somebody with a platform, or even just as somebody with a social media presence and a cyber footprint. People have got no right to judge me because they don't know what I do behind the scenes. And I personally just think it's very interesting that this term behind the scenes keeps coming up, because I think for anybody who is truly committed to anti-racism work, it would be impossible, surely, by this point in history, to not know that social media is one of the places to get your point across about anti-racism. Social media is a very powerful, very potent tool. And so when people kind of try to present this idea that behind the scenes, they're doing all of this amazing anti-racism work and pushing for justice and pushing for equality and all of that kind of thing, and yet they are fearful of using the hashtag Black Lives Matter, or fearful of elevating the voices of Black creators on their platforms, or whatever the case may be. I just think there has to be a lot of cognitive dissonance there, and there has to be some, to some degree, some inauthenticity there. There just has to be, because if you are genuinely enmeshed in the work of anti-racism, why would you not use your social media platforms to at least direct people to where they could donate, or at least make your stance explicit for your followers, or for anybody whom you could influence to be interested in themselves doing their anti-racism work? It doesn't make sense. You know it doesn't make sense. I know it doesn't make sense. It doesn't make sense. My theory about the whole behind the scenes narrative is that it is very difficult for people who feel that their audience will not be receptive to them taking a stance on Black Lives Matter to do so on social media. And I think that is more why they default to this idea of like, you don't know what I'm doing behind the scenes. You've got no right to judge who I am when I'm not online. And it's not about everything being online, you know, there is a whole world out there. As if the people that are tweeting or making videos or sharing resources aren't also doing community work or protesting or mentoring or any of that stuff. The two things are not mutually exclusive. So I think if somebody is very fearful of taking a stance against racism and taking a stance particularly in support of Black Lives Matter at this point in time, and they are defaulting to the narrative of you don't know what I do behind the scenes, I do think that that is highly questionable, and I think that's something that needs to be shadow worked, because everybody knows by this point that social media is a powerful tool, and that especially if you are inviting an audience to imbibe your message and to vibe with your philosophy and to resonate with what you're saying, it would be prudent to let them know where you stand on this very important issue, which has now gone fully global, by the way, in case you haven't noticed. So it would also be prudent just to let people know where you stand on it. And I think if you're not doing that, it is because you are aware that a certain amount of your following or a certain amount of your customer base is not going to deal very well with it. And you may lose some clout, some likes, some purchases, some money in your bank account, right? And I think that's something that you have to sit with that as an individual and ask yourself, is that really the most important thing right now? Is it important that I ensure that I keep people with racist and bigoted agendas on side so that I can protect my bottom line? Or is it more important that I do what I feel it's right to do in my heart, if indeed you feel it is right to do in your heart, and actually come out and use your platform to confirm for people where you stand, and of course reassure in particular Black supporters or potential Black customers who might really feel at the moment that they need to understand where you are on things, you know? So I just feel like behind the scenes is just, it's so weird. It's such an empty thing to say. None of the people who have said that they do things behind the scenes have described what they're doing behind the scenes. For one, there hasn't been a lot of description of what exactly is going on behind the scenes. And I do feel that it is just a deflection tactic. It's a deflection tactic that is used by people who are afraid to take a stance on social media. And I think that is something that does need to be shadow worked. Making your stance known publicly about Black Lives Matter and more broadly about issues of racial injustice means that you are sort of showing people what you're aligned with, what your philosophy is about, what is the foundation from which all of your work is built, right? If you are very sort of pie in the sky about it, very sort of airy fairy, I'm not really going to say anything, I'm just going to carry on doing what I'm doing, and soliciting for money for my products and services without really stating what it is that I think or feel about this, then it's going to create this feeling of mistrust because you are not really saying anything firmly about where you are on anything. I think that public open ownership of your stance on Black Lives Matter and your stance on Black oppression and your stance more broadly on racism in general is a way of really confirming to yourself and to others where you are with it. And I think if you don't want to do that, it's usually for some reason that you really do need to deeply examine within yourself. And it is going to cause feelings of distrust, feelings of disappointment, and feelings of suspicion amongst those who have followed your work or interacted with you or are personal friends with you. And they feel that this movement is very much about them receiving equality, receiving dignity, receiving rights. Those people that you have in your life, that you have in your audience, that you have in your community, they want to see that you are taking a stance, and a stance that supports them, a stance that sees them and values them. And if you are too afraid to do that because you're scared of who you might piss off or whose feathers you might ruffle, now's the time for you to have a conversation with yourself. That is the shadow work that I think you're being called to do this very day, if possible. In my last video, I talked about how white people who want to perpetrate racist acts or say racist things will feel very much backed up by white silence. If there is white silence all around them, if none of their white counterparts are willing to call them out or say, hey, time out, that's enough, we don't talk like that, we don't do that, that's not acceptable, that's racist. If that never happens, then they feel absolutely at liberty to continue with their behaviour, and that makes you complicit in their behaviour. It really couldn't be any simpler. I really couldn't boil it down any more than that. And that's one very, very good reason to use your voice to speak up. I was watching a video yesterday by the astounding Africa Brooke, who is incredible. I'm going to definitely leave a link to the video that she made and also her Instagram and her website in the list that I'm going to be creating. I was watching a video by her where she said that some people are kind of letting themselves off the hook by saying, oh, well, there's no point in me saying anything because I don't have a platform. And she said, your house is your platform. Your dinner table is your platform. Your conversation that you're having with your partner or your friend or your family member, that is your platform. Do not tell yourself that just because you haven't invited a public audience to a body of work that you've curated means that your voice doesn't mean anything, your voice doesn't count. And I completely 100% resonate with that. I think the way that certain spiritual people look at their own role in this can be quite disturbing. The other day, I was scrolling through my Instagram feed and I came across this teacher of 5D Ascension that I follow. So sort of a new age light worker ascension paradigm type of a person. And they mentioned that there's a lot of people doing work right now in the world to dismantle systems. And they said, this is not part of my personal contract in this lifetime. So I'm not getting involved with it. But here are some photos of us at Burning Man when it happened last. And I think that this could be really inspiring. And look at this amazing, time we were having at Burning Man. And I thought, okay, that seems odd. I also read another post on the same account that said that light workers are supposed to stand apart from what's going on in this reality and detach themselves from what's going on and observe what is going on. And at that point, I felt like I just had to leave a comment to try to sort of engage this person in where they're coming from and, what on earth possesses them to think that the reality that we are in now is not worth engaging in any way. I'm looking at my comment now, and basically it says that I think there are a lot of light workers who do involve themselves in action around race equality. So I don't think all light workers are sort of standing apart and being detached, if you will. I did say that I do feel that the attitude that you should just be detached from everything that's going on in the world is indicative of why issues with racial inequality still exist. This content creator got back to me and said that there are different workers in this lifetime and they have different kinds of roles. Some people are existing within this lifetime to be a demolition team, if you will, to sort of, demolish structures that aren't working or whatever. Others are here to kind of clean the streets after the demolition. These are the words that this particular person used, clean the streets after the demolition. And then they said others are the architects that help build something new once the old has been destroyed. And it is not our job to do all three. We have to accept what our role is. I found that to be a really dangerous, insidious narrative, I'll be honest with you. Because it sounds to me like what they're saying is that some people do the dirty work and the difficult work and the dangerous work and the work that involves rubber bullets or being arrested. And then other people come in afterwards once the sweep and clear has been done by the cleanup team. And they are the people that get to visualize the new world and the new way of being and the way everything's going to go from now on. And to me, that just seems quite indicative of issues to do with class, race and privilege that I've seen being enacted in the world. This idea that some people are superior enough to be the architects of the paradigm that we're going to exist within, and others are just sort of the peasantry that do the work of demolition and cleaning. And I just thought, this is just really off. There's something really off about this, because obviously because of the way that this person said that they're detached from any of the demolition work or the cleaning work, makes me feel that what they're saying is that they are going to be the architects of what is coming next. And I would argue that the fact that they don't want anything to do with the demolition or the cleanup would actually disqualify them from being allowed to have a say in what comes next, to be completely honest with you. But maybe that's just the socialist in me. So yeah, basically they said, you know, some people are the demolition team and some people are the architects of the new way. And I said that, you know, I felt that this was a sort of a dangerous point of view. And I said that it's great for the people who get to be the architects, but it's not so great for those who are contracted to do the dirty work beforehand. And I said, I think your point of view is dangerously reminiscent of so much of what is wrong with the current situation, which the protesters seek to address and change. And then this person wrote back to me and said, lol, I never said or implied that one job is more important than another. We each have a different role on this earth and each are equally important. Well, I don't think it's really about which role is most important. I think it's about which roles are glamorous and fun versus which roles are dangerous and unpleasant and scary. And I think what this person is teaching is a system of thought and an ideology where it's okay for some people to put themselves in the line of fire or to make themselves uncomfortable or to address the real social structures that keep certain people entrapped or certain generations of people entrapped. But if you are a 5D ascension pioneer light worker type, then that's not your job. Your job is to come along afterwards and sort of direct people from then on. We need to start to call this out, or at the very least step away from following it. It is just a really, really toxic narrative, and I really don't think I need to further explain why. I've also seen people saying, well, I'm not responsible for what happened in the past. Just because I'm white doesn't mean I'm responsible for chattel slavery. Just because I'm white doesn't mean I'm responsible for lynchings or police brutality. And I'm not responsible for these individual acts that have been perpetrated. And you know, again, I would refer you back to the analogy that I made about the machine in my previous video, right? The cogs in the machine and the thread of white supremacy that goes through each of those cogs and is moved around by those cogs. If you are aware on any level, and I don't think it can take that much common sense and that much emotional intelligence to have this awareness, all right? If you're aware on any level that there is white supremacy threaded through this society and you are white, then it's got to make sense to you that if you do not do anything to disrupt the machine, if you do not wedge something into the machine so that it stops moving, then you are saying, I'm okay with this machine. I'm okay with this white supremacist machine. It can keep running for the rest of my lifetime for all I care. I'm okay with it. It's not about asking yourself to feel responsible. I don't feel responsible for what happened to George Floyd that day. I know that I'm not personally responsible for murdering him in the street in broad fucking daylight with people all around begging me to stop squeezing the breath out of him. I know that that wasn't me personally. I know that I don't own responsibility for that. I'm not responsible for that. But I have responsibility as a white person to recognize that the system that has created these kinds of situations is a system that benefits me and gives me more rights and more power and more access and more influence than it gives to black people. That's my responsibility. It's not that I'm responsible literally for killing anyone or literally for an act of brutality. I just need to take responsibility for recognizing that the machine that sanctions and normalizes these acts is a machine that has been designed to benefit me. It's really not rocket science. It's really not that hard. Is it my fault that the machine has been set up to benefit me? No. Did I personally set the machine up to benefit me? No. But look, it's not about that. It's about having the intelligence to understand that the machine exists. The machine is a reality. It is a social, cultural, political, environmental reality. And if it's a reality, and if it's something of which I am grotesquely enough a benefactor, then I have to do something about dismantling it. Another narrative that I've seen that I want to call out is this idea that you've got to do your personal shadow work before you can do any shadow work that is linked to the collective. And I would definitely say that this is not the case. I believe that you can do your personal shadow work congruent with the shadow work that you're doing that is connected to the collective situation, the social situation. I definitely will continue to do my personal shadow work as I go along with the shadow work that I'm doing, which is collective and which is more about my external reality. Those two forms of shadow work can definitely coincide, and I would discourage you, frankly, I would go so far as to say that I discourage you from following teachers of shadow work who are telling you that you've got to do your personal work and get your stuff done first before you can do anything that involves anything else in the world. That's just simply not the case. And furthermore, it's been uncomfortable for me over the course of time, as somebody who's been talking about shadow work on my platform since 2012, to watch the term shadow work being slowly usurped by certain groups of people who only connect it to deeply self-oriented, self-reflective work and do not connect it in any way to the collective, to the social, or to the external. That is, that's not the whole animal. That's not all of what shadow work is about. So it's been really disappointing for me, to be honest, to see the term shadow work usurped and utilised and commodified by people who won't even write hashtag Black Lives Matter on their Instagram page or on their YouTube channel. It just really, that's something that just personally gets my feathers ruffled. And say what you want about that in the comments. We can have a debate about it in the comments if you want. It's not so much that I'm annoyed at anybody that could be like doing their shadow work and yet not seeing how it relates to combating racism in society. It's more the people that are selling shadow work, teaching shadow work, professing to be in a position of authority relating to shadow work, and yet not writing anything about the current situation, nothing about what is going on. You know, not just in relation to this, but in relation to anything, really. They just do not seem to have their finger on the pulse of what is going on in the world and what is going on with oppression. And yet they are setting themselves up as teachers of shadow work and people that have this deep knowledge about shadow work. And I think there's something a little bit iffy, dodgy, wavery about that, as my mother would say. So yeah, I think just basically follow your heart, follow your intuition, ask yourself if there's something a little bit ungroovy in the woodshed. I also wanted to say that I do not think that it is aggressive or in any way cruel to ask somebody with a public platform whose work you follow what their stance is on Black Lives Matter and what their stance is on the protests and on the fight for racial equality that's going on right now. I do not think that there is anything wrong with asking somebody whose work you follow or whose Patreon you support or whatever it might be to get clear about it if they haven't been clear about it so far. If you find that somebody is avoiding the subject and you would like to know where they stand, ask them on their public platform, where do you stand on this? I've noticed that you haven't posted any links or any particular perspective on it. I would like to know where you stand. There's so much more that I want to say. I've actually got more notes about things that have been pissing me off, just different perspectives that people have been having about the looting that's been happening, the mentions that have been made about horses being used during the protests and things like that. If you guys would like another video where I talk more about that, let me know down below, because I will definitely make a video if it's of interest to enough people. I do feel that this video is just going to run on too long, even for me, and I do make long videos, and I know that the majority of my audience do like a long video from me, but I think even for me and my channel, it's going to run on too damn long if I keep going. But those are just some of the gripes that I've been having and some of the things I've been feeling about shadows within the spiritual and wellness and cardslinger communities. I think it's definitely been an issue. Though, you know, that collection of issues, I suppose, have been playing on my mind. So I wanted to get some of these thoughts out there about, yeah, the challenges that I've been having, the things I've been noticing about my own white fragility, the things I've been witnessing that I feel can be called out or can be looked at and examined. I would love to know what your thoughts are down in the comments section. I found the comments in the last video, under the last video, very illuminating, very revealing, very profound, and a few of them really brought me to tears, genuinely brought me to tears. I'd love it if we could continue to have a conversation about what is going on right now with this discussion and what is going on right now in terms of where you are with it and what is going on in your psyche and how you are how you're approaching it and what you think about some of the things I've said. So I will go now and start to do the very, very long process of editing this. So much love. Thank you for joining me, and let's continue to do the work. Don't forget about my links that I'm going to be leaving down below, my list of resources for you, and don't forget to start making your own list of resources. Much love until next time, baby cakes. Blessed be.